So this is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, the scripture for April 6th. Chapters 8 and 9 of 2 Corinthians are basically Paul's theology of stewardship, kind of all compressed into just a couple chapters. And so today and tomorrow we're going to be talking a bit about money. They give an outline for why theologically Christian churches ought to take up an offering. Of course, there's practical reasons where, we're nonprofits and the way that we run as a church is based off of the generosity of the members. But there's also theological reasons. I was talking with a group of friends, a group of pastor friends a couple of years ago, and we were talking about, if we got like $1 billion, somebody just decided to bequeath a ton of money to one of our churches, would we still take an offering? Or what if your church endowment is so large that you can continue to fund your regular year-to-year operations just off of a fraction of the interest alone? Should you still take an offering? Well, some of these folks, in talking with them, were like, well, no, we wouldn't want the people to feel like they have to give of their hard-earned money to the church if the church can support itself. And, I hear that, but I think that Paul would say, absolutely, you need to take an offering, because an offering is how people have the privilege of getting involved in the work that God's doing. An offering is how people have a privilege to contribute out of their hard-earned money and give that back to God. An offering allows for people not to be shackled to the money that they've worked hard on, but instead to free themselves and to offer it up to God. Giving to the church, Paul suggests, is a privilege. For those who aren't part of the family of faith, of course, there shouldn't be pressure for guests or visitors to give. They're, of course, welcome to if they like, but we don't charge admission to come to church. And I think that that's important to note too. And there are some people who come and worship who aren't able to give very much because they only have a little. And that's important to note also. We're not expected all to give a couple $100 bills every time we walk in the door. It's not a Broadway show. We shouldn't treat it like it. But for those of you who can give, for those of you who are part of the family of faith, giving of your time and your money in a healthy way is a joy. It's something that we get to do. I once heard a sermon where the pastor suggested that as everybody gave into the offering plate, everybody could say, woohoo, because it's a joy to give. And it was really funny with a congregation that wasn't really accustomed to saying a whole lot, hearing some people say, woohoo, and other people really take it and ham it up a bit and say, woohoo! That's how we should be feeling when we're giving back to God. And it's not just money, it's also our time. Now, I think Paul's also careful in how he works out his theology here. He says that if we're eager to give, the gift is acceptable no matter what one has. If we're only able to give a little bit, we're not rated based on how much we give. We're rated based on how eagerly we're able to give it. We're not expected to give over and above. Churches should never be asking you to take out a line of credit to pay for operating expenses. That's not biblical, and that's not financially good stewardship. No, instead, we can give out of our abundance, and seeing this as a privilege, seeing it as the way that we get to contribute to God's kingdom, that's critically important. Now, in the last chunk of this chapter, Paul offers Timothy, in effect, a letter of recommendation similar to the one he talks about with the Corinthians, that the Corinthians are his letter of recommendation. And he also notes that there's a couple of mystery traveling companions that are following along with Titus. I think I said Timothy. It's Titus we're talking about. In verse 18 and in verse 22, he talks about these traveling companions. And some scholars think that one of these, at least, is Luke or Barnabas, who's coming. But in whatever case, Titus has a couple folks who are traveling with him to collect ministry money from the churches around. Now, I know that one of the hardest decisions for a family or for an individual to make is what to do with their money and what to do with their time. Figuring out what to give as an offering to God, both of time and money, is just always difficult. And it's important to note that this cannot be a reflection of one's own satisfaction or dissatisfaction with one's church. I think that's an important point to make. We're not rating our church based on how much tithe money we give. If we do that, then the money we're giving is no longer an offering. Setting this as a priority when budgeting is just as important. Setting our tithe, our offering, as a priority when budgeting is just as important as setting aside time to worship every week. For most people, it looks like setting aside Sunday mornings. For some of you, it may be setting aside Saturday nights or Wednesday evenings. But whenever you worship, keeping that free from other commitments is crucially important. And in the same way, setting aside offering money is crucially important in your budget. It's a privilege and a joy to contribute to God's work, even when it's hard. Now I wonder, how do you feel about collecting an offering? That's all for 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Tomorrow, the 7th of April, we'll be looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 9. May God bless you in your reading of Scripture.